At the lawyer's office, the air smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. Elena sat between her brother and her parents, her posture steady, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. When the lawyer began to read, the words landed one by one like small, deliberate stones. The family home is valued at $870,000, the investments totaling $2.4 million, all assigned to Mark Ward. Her name followed only once, beside a single-line item: a vintage watch belonging to her grandfather. No one looked at her. Her mother dabbed her eyes as if the moment were sentimental. Her father cleared his throat and said she was strong, that she had built her own life, that Mark needed it more. His voice carried pride, as if dismissing her was a compliment. She nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that said more than anger ever could. The lawyer smiled politely, already moving to the next file. Mark leaned back, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Elena noticed his cufflinks gleaming, the ones she had bought him for his promotion. She did not flinch. The silence stretched until it became its own language. She thought of every bill she had paid, every late-night transfer she had made to keep their balance sheets clean. They mistook her self-reliance for excess, her discipline for detachment. In that sterile room filled with legal phrasing and polite betrayal, she understood something simple and final. They had mistaken strength for coldness and gratitude for weakness. They forgot who kept the lights on while they basked in their own glow. And for the first time, she let them. In the weeks after the will reading, Elena found herself thinking in numbers. Not out of bitterness but habit, years of managing ledgers had trained her to translate emotion into figures that could be balanced. Her mind drifted to the quiet transactions that had built her family's comfort. $12,800 for her father's back treatments, covered in monthly installments so his pain would not reach collection notices. $6,300 for her nephew's tuition, wired at midnight after her second job evaluation. $18,000 to clear her brother's credit card debt before the bank froze his account. Each transfer left a faint trail of confirmation emails, polite thank yous, and her mother's messages that always ended with "You're such a blessing." She kept them all, not as proof, but as reminders that discipline was her love language. There had been nights she sat in her kitchen, laptop open, the smell of cold coffee clinging to the air. The house was quiet, except for the click of keys and the distant hum of the refrigerator. She would check each account twice, making sure no overdraft would follow the generosity. It gave her a kind of peace to see things settled, to know no one would worry because she had already done the worrying. Over time, those numbers began to feel like lines on a moral balance sheet. Her father's gratitude faded into expectation. Her brother's debt became routine. Her mother's thanks sounded like punctuation rather than meaning. Elena never complained. She believed stability was its own reward. But when she looked back, she saw a pattern. They called it love when she gave, and arrogance when she stopped. In their economy of need, her worth had always been measured by how much she was willing to lose. Elena opened her laptop late on a Thursday evening, the same way she always did when managing family accounts. Only this time, she wasn't adding anything. She clicked through each scheduled transfer, her cursor steady, her breathing even. The first to go was the $950 payment for her parents' mortgage. The system asked if she was sure. She waited a moment, then hit confirm. Next was the shared fund labeled Ward Family Support, $27,000 saved over 5 years. She transferred the entire amount into her personal savings and watched the old balance vanish from the shared screen. The last adjustment came quietly. Her mother's charity account is still registered under Elena's tax ID, with automatic deposits each quarter. She deleted the link, saved the confirmation, and closed the browser. Her phone buzzed the next morning. "Mortgage due soon, can you cover this month?" The message blinked like an old habit trying to stay alive. She typed 2 words, "Not mine," no punctuation, no apology. The silence that followed felt clean, like air after a storm. Later, an email from her father arrived with the subject line, "Re-mortgage." It carried the usual rhythm of guilt and justification. "We did our best. Don't let bitterness ruin the family." She read it once, then archived it. There was nothing left to reply to. For the first time in years, her accounts matched her conscience. Every number lined up with her own name. The weight that had always lived behind her ribs began to lift. She realized how quietly dependence had disguised itself as love. Giving had been her way of belonging, and belonging had been another word for debt. Now the equation was balanced. No shouting, no drama, just a ledger finally cleared. Love without obligation, she thought, is the only kind worth keeping. The grocery store was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet filled with hums from refrigerators and the soft shuffle of carts. Elena stood in line holding a basket of essentials, a loaf of bread, coffee, and fruit. When she looked up, her mother was already there, a few feet away, pretending to browse the magazine rack. Their eyes met for a moment too long. Her mother stepped forward, hands clasped, voice low. "You didn't have to go this far," she said, trying to sound reasonable. Elena kept her tone calm, almost gentle, as she explained that years of generosity had been mistaken for duty, and duty had turned into expectation. The words came out slow, measured, not to wound, but to end. The cashier scanned each item, the small beeps cutting through the air like a metronome marking distance. Elena slid her card through the reader, the motion simple, final. Her mother's lips trembled, a faint smile of pleading that never found ground. Behind them, a child laughed, the sound oddly pure against the tension. The receipt was printed, curling slightly before the cashier handed it over. Elena gathered her bag and nodded politely, not in forgiveness, but farewell. As she walked toward the exit, the automatic doors opened, letting in a rush of cold air. They closed behind her with a soft hiss, sealing the moment. For the first time, silence didn't ache. It sounded like freedom. 3 days later, Elena heard a knock at the door just after 9 in the morning. Her mother stood on the porch, neat and composed, holding a folder with a printed label that read, "Repayment Plan." The gesture looked polite, almost businesslike, but the stiffness in her mother's smile gave it away. Inside the folder were typed numbers and signatures, a schedule of small repayments spread over the next 2 years. At the bottom of the page, in smaller font, was a clause that asked her to refrain from speaking publicly about family matters. The words felt less like an apology and more like a contract for silence. Elena read the page slowly, her face still. She told her mother she hadn't asked for repayment, only space, that she hadn't withdrawn out of revenge, but to stop underwriting the life they built on her effort. Her mother said nothing, just pressed her lips and looked away. Elena set the folder on the porch railing, careful not to touch her mother's hand. When the first drops of rain began to fall, her mother turned back toward the car. Elena stayed, watching the paper darken as the ink bled across the page. The water pooled on the wood, carrying small fragments of words away. She closed the door behind her, leaving the folder to dissolve. Justice, she thought, rarely needed witnesses. Elena sat at her desk, surrounded by folders and receipts, each one a quiet record of years spent keeping others afloat. The rain had stopped outside, leaving a thin mist on the windows. She opened a new email addressed to a journalist she once met at a finance conference, someone known for writing about quiet corruption in small places. Without hesitation, she attached screenshots of transfers, messages, and bank statements. No commentary, no dramatic explanation, just evidence. She titled the subject line, "The Family CFO," and pressed send. 2 weeks later, the article appeared online, "The Family CFO: How One Woman's Discipline Became Her Parents' Dependency." It was clean, concise, and painfully human. The piece didn't accuse or humiliate. It simply traced a line between generosity and exploitation, between responsibility and control. Within hours, the story spread. Comments filled the thread from professionals who had been used for their stability, from mothers who carried everyone's burdens, from veterans who understood silent duty. They wrote about boundaries learned too late, and how peace felt like defiance. Elena read quietly, her face expressionless, but her chest lighter with every line. She realized she had never wanted them shamed, only the truth seen. The power in that clarity felt steady, not loud. No gloating, no victory lap, just release. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't open. For the first time in years, her name was attached to something that felt like her own. The silence around her no longer sounded empty. It felt earned, like still water after a long storm. She turned off the laptop, letting the screen fade to black, the reflection of her face calm and whole. The new apartment was small but filled with light. Elena signed the lease for $1,950 a month, the first place that carried only her name. The walls were white, the windows wide, and by afternoon the sunlight reached the edge of her desk. She unpacked slowly, stacking books in neat rows, setting her coffee maker by the window. When the first pot brewed, the smell filled the room with a quiet warmth. The space had no trace of anyone else's needs, only her own rhythm. In the evenings, she sat at the desk with her laptop open, typing the first lines of a book she had been thinking about for years. It was not about her family, but about strength, about the kind that endures without applause. Outside, traffic hummed, a reminder that life moved forward regardless of who noticed. She felt no urgency, only stillness. One morning, her phone buzzed with a message from her father. It was short. "You were never cold. You were constant." She read it once, then set the phone face down beside her cup. No reply felt necessary. Calm had replaced closure. She took a sip of coffee, watching light ripple across the glass table. The city below sounded alive, faint but steady. Peace, she thought, doesn't announce itself. It just settles. We are taught to give without limit, to prove love through exhaustion, to keep the peace even when it costs us our own. But real loyalty has boundaries, drawn not from pride but from self-respect. Elena learned that strength is not about carrying everyone else's weight. It is about knowing when to put it down. The lesson came quietly, without applause or revenge, just the understanding that peace cannot live where resentment is fed. When she stopped trying to fix what was broken, she discovered what was whole inside herself. Dignity was not the reward. It was the path. Every choice she made in silence was a kind of discipline, not distance. The world around her still moved, unchanged, but she no longer needed its approval. Peace, she realized, is not the absence of conflict. It is the proof of discipline, and discipline, in the end, is love made steady.